Well, India's attempt to become the first nation to land a spacecraft near the moon's unexplored South Pole has failed. Astrophysicist and cosmologist at ANU, Brad Tucker, joins me live now. Brad, thank you for your time this afternoon. I know you were very excited about this, but what went wrong?
Yeah, it had kind of the community on the edge of their seats. I was up early watching this, and essentially what happened was during essentially the final descent stage, so they switched to what's called fine braking, and that is for the last few kilometers, they had to apply essentially air brakes to land as softly as possible on the lunar surface. At 2.1 kilometers, something went wrong. It started to deviate from its planned descent rate. They lost communication with it, and that's pretty much it. So we don't really know the state of the craft as of now, but given communication hasn't been restored, it hasn't been contacted or hasn't sent out a message, it appears that it's been lost, unfortunately.
So, Brad, what had scientists hoped to gain from this landing?
So this was a very ambitious mission. So it had three parts. The orbiter, and that orbiter is still orbiting around the moon and will for another year. And then they had the lander and the rover. And the rover was aiming to explore, as you said, the South Pole. Now, the South Pole is very interesting. In fact, the previous Indian mission showed that there was lots of ice on the South Pole. And this has now led NASA and others to say the South Pole is the place for humans' return to the moon. And so the rover was going to go and do ground measurements, essentially surveying some of the areas where landing sites could be, and really lay the groundwork for this return to the moon. So the whole space community is a bit, sad that they weren't fully successful today.
Yeah, am I right in saying, Brad, too, that India would have been the fourth nation to make a soft landing on the moon?
That's right. So, the U.S. and Russia, or the USSR, and China have all landed on the moon. Israel made an attempt back in April, but they also had a problem. So during their descent, their computer that was controlling their landing sequence essentially had a computer error. They couldn't do the Control-Alt-Delete in time, essentially, to reboot it, and it crashed as well. So they would have been the fourth, and more importantly, they would have been the fourth in a very quick way and also a very cheap way compared to some of the predecessors.
Well, the mission, I believe, roughly cost $140 million. How has the Prime Minister responded?
So, yeah, and that is very cheap. To put it into perspective, that is half the budget of the Avengers Endgame. So, that is a lot to actually get to the moon. If we think about it, the Apollo missions cost $180 billion. And the PM was both in the control room during this whole sequence and then had a press release a few hours after. And look, I think he was very proud of all the Indian scientists, as, here in Australia we were as well, and said, look, this is not going to stop them. They will try again. And we'll see this. India has done this with Mars. India is becoming quickly a very big space superpower, and they realize it. And what others are doing, where they're doing better than others, is they're doing it really cost effective. And that's really challenging, say, US and Europe and Russia to get their act together, to be honest.
So how long do you think we'll have to wait to see another attempt?
So look, I wouldn't be surprised if we see an announcement in the next year to two that they're going to try this again. Once you have one, they already know how to build it. They already know where the snags or the technical issues are going to be. So it's actually quicker to build a second one. So they don't have to do the design. So I would not be surprised if we saw the turnaround of a second one in the next few years, potentially even back in time before the U.S. lands humans on the moon in 5 years' time.
Brad, let's go back to news from earlier in the week. 2 satellites had a near miss. What happened there? Does it reflect badly on SpaceX?
Yeah, so what was happening is, SpaceX earlier this year launched, it's called Starlink. So this is a constellation of satellites. So this is essentially a train of about 60 satellites. Now, they want to get to hundreds to actually do communication. Now, ESA, the European Space Agency, said that there was a potential collision between one of the old satellites, so one of the satellites that didn't work with SpaceX, and their satellite. SpaceX was not moving it out of the way, and ESA said they had to maneuver their satellite to get it out of the way. Now, I don't think it necessarily looks bad on SpaceX. Now, SpaceX is proud themselves on their satellites that they can do automated moving, so essentially they can detect if there's going to be a crash and get out of the way. That clearly didn't work, and there was a communication glitch. So I would say politically, it doesn't look bad on SpaceX, but sometimes their technology, as great as they're doing, suffers just like the rest of the companies.
Do you think we'll see incidences more like this happening, and are there any laws in place to prevent this?
Yeah, this is really the big worry. Is, in 2009, we saw the first crash between two satellites. A Russian Cosmos communication satellite crashed into Iridium-33, and this was a satellite company's phone. This was the first crash, and it actually showed that these things can happen. Now, space is big, but as more and more things get up there, the likelihood for collisions between satellites or pieces of debris, what we call space junk, is a big deal. And this is where Australia is really positioning itself in terms of monitoring space, essentially space air traffic control. The legal part is really tricky because you have to prove it came from a country or a company, and then you have to show negligence, and then the country who's launched it is responsible. So this whole area of space law, as we've seen issues in the past few weeks, is a big deal, and it's one that's kind of becoming the Wild West out there. And as more and more things go up, we're going to have more and more issues, unfortunately.
Brad Tucker from ANU, I appreciate the update. I'm out of time. I could talk to you all day. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks, Sam.